Let's get started then. So my name is Craig Mitchell. For those that don't know me, I'm a senior ITSM consultant for AlfaPeople, and I'm going to be giving a short presentation today on AlfaPeople IT service management services that can help organizations derive value from ITIL. And hopefully it won't take too much of your time, and hopefully you'll find some of it at least marginally interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the value of ITIL, what I see as key aspects of the value of ITIL, and then I'm going to go into three core services that we offer now at AlfaPeople, and those are ITIL awareness education, ITIL maturity assessments, and process optimization. In terms of the value of ITIL, the things that I see as really important are ITIL provides a common language and understanding for people in IT. And I think that's hugely important, that everybody shares the same language, understands the same terminology, and has a clear understanding of the expectations for themselves and from others. And those come from really knowing what incident management is about, what change management is about, and sharing that knowledge. I also think that the fact that you get processes that are aligned to a recognized framework of best practice is really important. That for organizations that are embarking on an ITIL journey, they aren't just going out on a limb, they're doing something that thousands of organizations have done before. But it's also really important that you're not taking processes that are out of the box. You're developing processes that meet the specific needs of your organization. And what this gives you in terms of value is then a consistent and standardized approach to delivery of IT services. And I think consistency of service is massively important. I think very often customers will put up with poor service if they know that it's going to be delivered consistently that way. What customers get confused about is when one day they get great service, the next day they get bad service, then they get good service, then they get bad service again. And I think that really tends to upset people. And a really good example of that is there's a restaurant in Chinatown here in London called the Wong Key, and for years they got by on delivering the worst service imaginable, and that was why people actually went to the restaurant. But it was consistently bad, and people used to joke about it, but they still went in their droves to the restaurant. And that's just one example of how customers can accept poor service as long as it's consistent. The other thing about ITIL then is that it flexes to accommodate your changing requirements. So one of the tenets of ITIL is adapt and adopt. So you adapt the parts that you want, you adopt the parts that you want to meet your specific requirements at a point in time. And as you mature, you can take on more processes or other aspects of those processes to suit. And that way you can actually grow with your ITIL implementation. As I already said, it's a recognized framework. It's long established. ITIL's been around for well over 20 years. It is the de facto worldwide standard for IT service management. So you can have confidence in the fact that you're not doing something that hasn't been done before. And again, something that's really important to me is that it's customer focused. It's not technology focused. And when ITIL was first introduced, it was probably the first IT framework that tried to see beyond the technology itself. It was everything up to that point was very technology driven, and ITIL was really the first attempt to recognize that you needed to involve customers and you needed to be receptive to what customers actually wanted. And I think that's hugely important. So how are we going to get this value out of ITIL? Well, to me, it starts with education and developing this common language and common understanding. Now, ITIL has a very well-known comprehensive training program in terms of foundation training, practitioner training. You can even go up through the life cycle classes. You can go on to become an ITIL expert. And that's great, but it all takes time and it all costs a lot of money. And what we can do at AlfaPeople is through our ITIL awareness education is we can bring an accelerated approach to help bring that common language and framework to your people in IT. And what's really important is that education is tailored to the specific requirements of your organization. So if you send people on an ITIL course, a foundation course, they're going to cover all of the ITIL processes. but that may not be what you need as an organization and part of your journey. You might just be looking at a core set of processes, incident, request fulfillment, problem, change management. You probably need a piece of, service level management thrown in there because of its ties into incident management, for example, but you don't need the entire breadth of ITIL all in one go. And typically the overhead on organizations in sending people out on these courses is huge, because if you send somebody out on their ITIL Foundation course, they're going to be off-site for 3 days. You can only send 1 or 2 people at a time because the impact on your service support organization is going to be massive. And I've seen it happen in lots of organizations where they embarked on a program of sending everybody on the foundation course. They were then embarking on a major service transformation. Halfway through the training program, they pulled the plug on it, so half the people had been trained, and they decided that any money that they had now had to go into implementation of the new ITSM toolset or some other aspect of their service transformation program. And so people lost out, and you didn't have that common understanding because not everybody had had the training to the same level. And what we can do at AlfaPeople is we can deliver these awareness education sessions as half-day sessions, full-day sessions, to a class size that meets the requirement of the customer. And they can be on a half-day basis, as I said, or a full day, 8 to 10 people, whatever suits. But you don't have that major impact on your service support organization, and everybody actually gets used to the same body of material. They develop that same language, that same understanding. And because we're delivering it to groups of 8 to 10, and they're shorter sessions, significantly lower cost than going through formal ITIL accreditation. And key to all of this, again, is that our consultants at ITIL, at AlfaPeople, they're all consultants with real-world experience. So we've been through ITIL implementations. We've worked with organizations where ITIL has been in place, and we've seen where it's gone wrong and what needed to be done to fix it. We've seen organizations who don't have ITIL and all the pitfalls associated with that. So actually we're well versed in being able to demonstrate actually where to get the real value from it. So in terms of the course content, we'll cover things like what is service management, what is a service. I think that's really important. Everybody might think they know what a service is, but I think if you did a straw poll around any group, everybody would give a different version of what they think a service is. And so we cover that from an ITIL perspective. We'll talk about IT service management, and we'll talk about the difference in IT service management frameworks. And here's just a list of various service management frameworks, standards, movements, and methodologies that I put together. It's not comprehensive. I'm familiar with some of these, but probably not all of them. So you've got COBIT in here, you've got DevOps, you've got the Microsoft Operations Framework, Standard plus Case. So it's just to show that ITIL is not the only framework in this space, but it is still the de facto worldwide standard. Again, in the content of the course, we cover, what is ITIL, what's the history of ITIL, what can you do in terms of ITIL certification, and we make sure that everybody really understands the life cycle for IT and how that underpins everything about ITIL. And we'll talk about things like the 4 Ps of IT service management. Here's one of the slides that we actually used during the course, just as an example, but it gives that sense of, what ITIL is about, that it is this standard. It's a framework of best practice. It's not to be confused with a methodology. It is non-prescriptive. It's process-driven. It does consider the full life cycle of IT services, and it's also aligned to ISO 20000. So for organizations that want to get formal accreditation in IT service management, there is an international standard there where they can approach that and go and get certification. And again, ITIL, it's underpinned by this comprehensive education program if you want to go down the full route. 4 Ps of IT service management. We'll talk about this on the course, how ITIL recognizes that proper IT service is made up of people, products, partners, and process, where products is the technology, but it is the bringing together of all 4 of these elements that enable you to deliver service, that there is no one part on its own that actually can do it all, and certainly the technology does not deliver service. As a sample process, I've just got a few slides from the awareness education program on incident management. And through the course, what we do is we talk about what's the definition of an incident, what is the purpose of incident management. We'll look at the overall scope of the process and how it delivers value to the business. We'll walk through the process steps. We'll talk about the different process steps, what they mean for organizations, what they actually have to do. And we'll even touch on things like customer satisfaction, how good incident management can deliver customer satisfaction, and how that customer satisfaction can be monitored and measured. Here's a sample of an incident management process, and we'll talk through that in detail on the course. And then we'll also go through things like a sample priority matrix. So we'll educate people in terms of how priorities for incidents are derived through a mix of impact and urgency, and then from that priority matrix, how you then build up your service levels for different priorities so you can understand what the expected response or resolution targets are. We'll also talk about things like the challenges associated with the particular process. And there are a number of challenges associated with incident management. There are a number of risks associated with doing it, with not doing it. But also we'll explain about the critical success factors for making it actually work, how it integrates with other processes, what the metrics are that need to be there so that you can actually measure how well you're performing. And then we mustn't forget, at the end there are specific roles and responsibilities involved in the incident management process and a governance framework that needs to be maintained if any incident management implementation is to be successful. There has to be ongoing governance of the process. And I think we also need to cover for the particular process things around the challenges in today's world. So things have moved on in lots of ways from the original ITIL books, which said every incident must be logged. We now have self-service and knowledge management systems that are contributing to ticket deflection. And what does ticket deflection actually mean for today's IT? It does reduce demand on the service desk, so everyone gets all excited about that, but it does pose a lot of new questions. So how do we quantify and understand those things that are no longer recorded? How do we know that because people didn't log the incidents, that they actually found the resolution to those incidents? So it's things like that that need to be considered in the context moving forward in IT service management. And how does this all impact on service if people are doing things on their own as customers and we don't really know what they're up to because we actually don't see the end product? So we cover all of those kind of things in the course. And just to recap, what we're really trying to drive through this ITIL awareness education is this concept of sharing a common language, sharing a common understanding, get that accelerated learning going with content that's specific to the organization that requires the education. It's a cost-effective means of educating staff in ITIL, and that education is delivered by experienced consultants with a real-world context where examples can be given that people can actually relate to because people have been through the same experiences. So education is the first part to me in terms of deriving value from ITIL. The next thing is, the ITIL maturity assessment. So this is about knowing where you are and knowing where you're going. So understanding your current capability and then delivering future capability. So what is the ITIL maturity assessment? Well, it's based on an old manufacturing standard, the capability maturity model integration. And the idea is it's meant to measure your level of process maturity for those processes that are in scope using a targeted set of questions. And based on the responses to those questions, we create a score, and then that lets you know approximately where you are in terms of maturity. What this does for an organization is it provides a baseline of the organization's maturity against industry standards. So we know there's data published that will tell us where organizations typically are in terms of their ITIL maturity. And the maturity assessment allows you to measure against that and then measure further improvement, so you can see as you go through your ITIL journey how far you've developed, how far you need to go. It will enable you to identify the missing attributes of your existing process framework, which is really important. What are the things you need to build to achieve success? And it will help you then determine your roadmap to maturity, and not just in terms of what you need to do, but the time frames that you want to do it in. What is right for your organization? How does it work? Well, initially we carry out a scoping exercise. We'll work out which processes are in scope for the maturity assessment, and then we'll conduct a number of structured interviews with key support staff, managers and customers. Getting the customer input is really important in this, because typically they will have a very different view of IT services from the people delivering the IT services. All the questions are process aligned, and then the scoring is based on the aggregation of all the interviewee responses. So we'll maybe interview 10 or 20 people around incident management, pool all their scores together and get an aggregated score. And then at the end of that, we'll produce a report and present that back to the organization. So in terms of how we collate the information, everything's broken down into subject areas. This is just an example. So you'll see things are broken down into service desk, incident management, problem management. Within each of those areas, then there's a further breakdown. So again, service desk, for example, topic number 4 is gauging customer satisfaction. In incident management, topic number 3 is classification, initial support. So we're building in specific questions in each of these areas. Here's an example of the specific questions then. So for classification initial support on incident management, is each incident assigned an impact and urgency classification code? So there may be a view, typically held by all people, that yes, this happens for every single incident. But once you start getting out there and interviewing people, customers, third line support, service desk, you may find that things aren't quite what they seem. Once all the information is collated and scored, you'll get something like this back as part of the report. So this is just a spider diagram. What we've got here is the pink shows the actual score achieved against specific processes that we covered. 5 is the maximum that could be achieved for any one of these processes. Typically, the industry standard is probably going to be around the 3. But for any organization that wants to, you can set an achievement mark that you want to achieve and measure against that rather than the overall score. And I think that's quite important, is that what needs to come out of the ITIL maturity assessment is something that when people get the feedback, they can take that positively and see that as something to build on. It shouldn't be seen as a negative if you get a poor score. It just means that there's room for improvement. So not only can we present the data in that way, we can also present it in a table format, so you can see how you're doing against industry best practice. What does this mean for you against each of these processes? And then if we look at the overall ITIL maturity assessment model, you can see here that at the bottom at level 1 in red, where your processes are ad hoc and chaotic, relying heavily on people to take initiative, you're at high risk, with little productivity or quality. And then as you move up process maturity levels and you get to level 5 where you're starting to optimize your processes and you've introduced a high level of automation in there, that's when you really see your exposure to risk really comes down. You've got that high level of productivity and quality in there. Overall, what are the benefits? Again, I said earlier, you get that baseline score against industry standards. You can highlight the deficiencies in your process, your organization, your tooling capability, your technical capability through a lot of this maturity assessment criteria. It will help an organization in determining the roadmap to improvement, help them clarify their objectives, their timeframes, those kind of things. And it allows that improvement to be measured progressively, so you can see year on year how you're developing and where you want to develop in the future. So that was the second element to me in terms of deriving value. The third one is process optimization. So this is about deriving the most value you can from your processes. And what we do at AlfaPeople is we can come out, we can review your processes, we can help you rebuild your processes or build those processes from scratch. The value that you really get here is that our consultants, they're industry accredited experts, they know what they're doing, they've been through this before. They're going to make sure that your processes are aligned to industry best practice and that those processes meet the needs of your organization. They're not just templates. That's really important. Through this, we can then eradicate process deficiencies. And then also we can back that up with supporting documentation, so policy documents, procedure documents, governance frameworks. It can all be there in support of those processes. And it can also help highlight any misalignment of your processes with your ITSM tooling capability. So is it the processes that are deficient? Is it the tools that are deficient? And by developing the processes the way you want, does that mean that you now need to go on to develop a new tool or purchase a new tool even? So again, how does this work? So we go through a scoping exercise typically to determine which of the processes are in scope for re-engineering. We conduct interviews with the key support staff to understand what the challenges and constraints are around those processes. Where are those processes successful? Where is good practice in application? And what are the desired outcomes from the processes to make sure that we're developing things that will really be used moving forward? We conduct a review of the existing processes, and then we go through a redesign process. It's on an iterative basis, making sure that at all times the customer's objectives are what we're focusing on. Then we'll prepare and deliver the supporting documentation, and then the final part would be that review of alignment to your toolset. Typically, we would start with a high-level process, so such as this incident management process, but we can also start with the customer's own incident management process. It's whatever will suit the customer. From there, we can then go and start to develop more detailed processes that are aligned to specific roles and responsibilities within the organization. And we can do this for incident management, we can do it for problem management, change management, whichever processes are required. And through the deliverables of all this, what you get is a set of Visio process maps, production of a number of policy documents, one for each process. These are really key because the policy documents help everyone understand what the context they will be working on that process is. So there need to be some rules applied, and the policy spells those out. We'll also then produce the detailed procedural documentation, identify the critical success factors and key performance indicators for each of those processes. That's really key because you want to be able to measure your performance on that process as time goes on. And again, we can develop the roles and responsibilities document so that, we know what all the roles are for incident management or change management, what the expectations for people are, how they are expected to deal with other roles within that particular process. We can also develop RACI matrices, and then lastly, the advice and guidance on establishing appropriate governance structures. So it is really important with processes that there are process owners, that there is regular review of the process, that the review is undertaken in the context of delivering business value, because if it's not delivering business value, then why are we there? Why are we doing it? So we need to then realign our thinking and make sure that that process is delivering business value. Again, we can then look at it in the context of toolset alignment. So here, if we've developed our process, we understand our process flow, then we can look at how that process flow fits with our service management tool. So here I have a screenshot from Provence, shows a standard incident management process flow. Do we need to tailor our process flow within Provence, or do we actually need to tailor our process itself? And we can make that decision through this process of process optimization. So to sum up then, in terms of the benefits of the process optimization, you get that full set of up-to-date documentation, and that is shared across all of your staff. And that's really, really important because you then have a single source of truth. I've worked with a number of organizations where, everybody thinks that they know what the process is, but they're working on 4 different versions of the process, probably, 3 years apart in terms of, publication date. And things have moved on and people don't know about it. So you get something that's up to date, reflects your organization, is the single source of truth, you know that it's aligned to industry best practice. And these things, these processes, once they're defined properly, they will help improve any organization in understanding their capabilities, their challenges, their risks. It's really, really important. So, to me, in terms of, getting benefits from ITIL, these are the three key services that we offer at AlfaPeople now, and I think it's summed up as education, education, education. The more people know, the more people understand, the better they're going to be able to get value from introducing ITIL into their organization. Knowing where you are and knowing where you're going, and that's what the ITIL maturity assessment is all about. Everybody has to know where they are, where they're going, what they're doing. And then lastly, it's about optimizing process. The more that you optimize your process, the more that you work on your process and change your process and adapt it as things develop within your infrastructure, within your organization, as your business requirements change. You've got to keep moving your processes forward, and that's what will deliver real benefit from ITIL. And that's pretty much everything I have to say.
Craig, it's Wayne.
Hi, Wayne.
I don't want to hog your time slot, but that it's been a long time since my ITIL training, and that's an excellent review. So I appreciate that. In your experience, how many customers really seize hold of the fact that they need an ITIL maturity assessment done, and how many of them, to use a bad phrase, how many of them already think they know it all?
So that's a difficult one to answer. So let's start going back a bit. If anybody commissions an ITIL maturity assessment, they typically understand how badly it's needed.
Agreed.
But once you get out there to the people that you're interviewing, you'll get a really wide range of perceptions that people think either we don't need this, we do know it all, and people who think, oh, this is just what our organization needs. So you get really mixed views, and I think that's quite important because it will help demonstrate how much cohesion of thought that there is within the IT organization. I have seen a lot of organizations want ITIL maturity assessments. Where it tends to fall down is that this is something that should be done on a regular basis. Once you've reviewed your ITIL maturity, you should be going through the process again a year later to see if you really have improved. And that's the bit where it tends to fall down, is that organizations think, oh, we did that once, we don't need to do it again.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, they will have improved because, they'll have a process, they'll have a policy, they'll have appointed an incident process owner, they will have governance meetings, so they will have improved.
Yep.
They just don't measure it.
Which is a huge loss, because that's where all the wins come from, right? You want to be able to run back up the hall to Mahogany Row and say, hey, boss, look what we accomplished.
Well, exactly. And how do you know what the next steps should be if you haven't gone back and done that measuring? Yep. You might think, oh, our change management process has sorted all that out. Well, actually, maybe it hasn't. And there might be people, who are, crying in the wilderness going, we're really unhappy with this, it's not working for us, but they get ignored. And actually, if you go through that formal review, then that can show those things. But again, I think the problem with a lot of this is that the formal review needs to really be undertaken by an external body. There are ITIL maturity assessments that you can download online and perform the assessment yourselves, but in my experience, people aren't honest about things like that.
No.
And they'll choose who they want to be interviewed, and they'll just pick the people that are on side to get the results that they want to get. So it's a difficult one.
Yes. Okay, appreciate your thoughts. Thanks.
Any other questions from anyone? I put everyone to sleep, didn't I?
Not at all, Craig.
I've just woken you up.
No. Oh, sorry, Sadie, are you going to go?
Yeah, I was just going to ask another question. Craig, how small a team could you actually do the processes for? So if you had a team of about 3 people, is it worth actually doing, offering this service to, or is it too small? I'm just trying to think about how small a team.
I don't think any size team is too small. I think, if you don't have a great deal of maturity, I think you just want a simple process. You don't go into massive detail.
Yep.
You just keep it fairly simple and straightforward. So you design what you need to do to fit the size and scope of the organization. So, but I think I've not come across an IT organization yet that could not benefit from some investment in developing their processes. No matter what size.
No, I agree completely. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
How do you go about taking your services as well? So what's the process? If it's internal or with any of our clients?
Not quite sure I understand the question.
So, if we are doing a project with one of our clients and we can see actually they could benefit from having an ITIL assessment done and potentially even putting in place some processes for them, how would we engage with yourselves to get that going?
You just need to ask, basically.
Yeah.
And invite us in to come and meet with the client.
Right.
I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about any of this stuff at any time. To me, it's what I live and breathe, really, from an IT service management perspective. I've worked with so many organizations and gone in and talked to them about the challenges that they face, and I think many organizations face much the same challenges. And it's about, I think people are often a little skeptical, but once they understand that the things that they're going through and the problems that they're faced with, and I think it's important not to go in there and propose solutions. It's important to go in and say, let's go in and find out all the information that we can and understand your challenges, and then we'll propose the solutions. And that's the kind of thing that the maturity assessment does. It doesn't say, there's a quick fix and a silver bullet, we'll just stick ITIL in. It's not about that. It's about actually understanding that there are specific failings or specific challenges that need to be addressed and putting something together that will address those specifics.
Greg, one other thing, do you have a price range associated with a typical, and I use a word in parentheses, a typical maturity assessment? Is there, obviously there won't be one number, but is there a range?
So a lot will depend on the number of processes that you're going to cover.
Okay.
The number of interviews that you're going to conduct.
Makes sense.
And then, how long you want to put into that. So to me, where I've run process maturity assessments in the past,
yep.
I'm looking at, say, 5 days of structured interviews, depending on the size of the IT organization. So it could be less.
Yep.
You probably have a day of preparation where you're trying to make sure you've understood the scope and all of that. So you're going in and talking to the right people about the right things, and then 2 to 3 days to produce a report. I think it's also important to understand how the organization wants the report produced. So some organizations will want a report that suggests a roadmap. Some will want a report articulated in terms of risk. Some may want both. It's just really understanding what the client wants to get out of it. So, and I think that's really important. It's not just about going and performing a maturity assessment. There need to be specific things that the organization wants to achieve from it.
Yeah, you want to know what they want to do with it.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to kind of go along with the client a little bit. That they want things presented in a certain way because they're trying to get across a particular message internally. So often, if it's a senior management stakeholder who's commissioning it, he will want specific messages to come out of it, and you kind of have to just accept that. You can't go in and be completely agnostic in your approach. You do have to accept that, you know, you're tailoring it to some extent to meet the needs of the client.
Yep. So you're probably in the $10,000 to $20,000 range for a typical one, from just thinking of daily rates and stuff like that.
That's probably, yeah, not too far away.
Okay. Good to know.
Anybody else got any questions?
I think that's all we've got for today, Craig.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Craig, for this webinar. It's been really insightful, and you know, hopefully it will inspire some businesses to really have a look at their ITIL in their organisation. If anyone would like to contact Craig, you can reach him directly at cm@alphapeople.com, or if you'd like to get a ITIL maturity assessment or any of the services outlined, just email on info.uk@alphapeople.com. Thank you.
Craig, sorry, Sophie, just one last question. Craig, if I send you an email, can you share that deck?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This recording will also be available for download as well, probably within the next 2 days.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sophie.
Have a great weekend, everyone.